Hello and welcome to our Friday chill out with the UBE Academy. Um, Wonderful day today here in Berlin, and we have some great guests today. But before we start, let me introduce the team. We have Chiara today as our producer. Hello, Chiara. How are things in Spain?
Hello, thank you, Oliver. Well, it's a beautiful sunny day here in Spain, and it's a pleasure to be here as always. And it's great to have you also, Charles, on the show today.
Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, Charles Hecker. Chuck. My God. What? Look what the cat drag did. The Global Research Director at Control Risk in London. A few words on Chuck. Chuck is a Harvard graduate, a specialist on the former Soviet Union and Russia and Eastern Europe. He's a former journalist with the Moscow Times and the Miami Herald, and he was a finalist of the Pulitzer Prize some moons ago. And he's today one of the world's leading experts on risk. Hi, Chuck. How are you?
Well, after an introduction like that, I'm feeling pretty good. Hi, Oliver. It's great to see you. Thank you for the fantastic invitation to join you and your audience today. I'm absolutely delighted to see you and to talk with you.
Okay, just about the format, those of you who regularly watch our little lounge, we have prepared a couple of questions for you, Chuck. Questions on risk and the universe and everything. And of course, it's all about risk today. It's all about business, and it's unfortunate to a large extent also about COVID-19. So, my first question is before we really get into the nitty-gritty details, being based in London as a true New Yorker, how's life as a global risk expert facing both COVID-19 and Brexit?
Oof, yeah, we're really sort of taking our lumps here in the UK. The UK is not having a very good pandemic. The infection rates and the mortality statistics are among the highest in the world, and that has been incredibly damaging to the reputation of the Johnson government here in the UK. And the government is at the exact same time engaged in negotiations as we speak on how to conclude or not conclude a trade deal prior to the drop dead date of December 31st of this year. Our analysts are skeptical that any kind of meaningful trade deal between the UK and the EU can be struck in the very few months that are remaining, which means either an extension, which is incredibly unpalatable to the UK body politic, or crashing out.
Okay. But then let's start with COVID-19. Is beyond Brexit, is COVID-19 the final blow to globalization as we know it?
Yeah, so this is a good point to remind everyone that it's our view, and also it's kind of the view of everybody in the analytical community at control risks and beyond, that the pandemic has not presented us with an entire new category of risk. All of the risk issues that we had on our plate prior to the pandemic are still there. And it's our view that the pandemic has taken those issues and intensified them and accelerated them. So by and large, we're dealing with a familiar set of risks, but they're coming at us harder and faster. And globalization is certainly one of them.
Interesting. So, okay, let's go. Let's talk about these risks. I think one of the biggest issues we have at the moment is, and we shouldn't talk too much about the UK and the US administrations that are handling COVID-19, or why wearing a mask has now become a tribal thing in your country. However, what's going on between the US and China? How is the COVID-19 pandemic impacting this drama? what's happening to trade. I mean, this is something that we as European business people need to understand.
Yeah, so this follows on from the comment of globalization, really. And globalization is under pressure because of things like nationalism and populism and protectionism, all sorts of trends that began long before the pandemic. And all of those trends really have gone into hyperdrive as a result of the pandemic. And so we have a US election campaign getting started in the US with the election coming up at the very beginning of November. And the whole US China trade topic is going to be working very hard on the campaign trail. And, most of the talk will be about trade. But really, what the US China relationship is about global technological supremacy. And that is who
Wow.
has the military technology, the medical technology, the telecoms technology, the supercomputing technology, who has the best and who has the most, and which country is going to set the pace and set the standard going forward. And so really, people will talk about trade, but underneath all of this is a super technology rivalry. And European companies need to think very hard about this in a number of ways. First of all, Europe has to be sure not to become a spectator at Wimbledon, where you're watching the ball just go back and forth between Beijing and Washington. Europe can get trapped between the two superpowers. And so Europe has to play its own role and has to become a player at Wimbledon rather than a spectator. The other thing, of course, is that everyone is waiting to see what the result of the election will be and what a Biden presidency will mean for the US China relationship and what a Biden presidency will mean for the role of Europe. So, two important things here. It is, broadly speaking, our view that Europe will get along better with Biden than it is with Trump. And that's probably not too difficult to understand
Not
or
really, no.
explain. But that means that the US and Europe can combine their economic and political weight in any sort of rivalry against China. But the other thing is that there will be no relief in the US hard line on China as a result of a Biden presidency. Biden is very much a China hardliner. The rhetoric will go away. The yelling and screaming will calm down. But make no mistake, Biden will take a very hard line against China. So it's not an immediate rapprochement between Beijing and Washington if Biden wins in November. It's still a very long, tough road ahead. But Europe will have an easier partner to work with in Washington if Biden wins.
Okay, but we're talking about two superpowers, and that's I'm going off script here, but what happened to good old Mother Russia here?
Yeah. So Russia
I thought they
is
had quite an impact on the last elections.
well. So the big word with Russia a long time ago was all about this Asian pivot and how Putin was going to have to cozy up to Xi Jinping, and that the future for Russia was a better relationship with China. Uh, that really has not materialized. There are a few problems in the Russian global relationship, and that is Russia derives a lot of its power as an energy player. And with what's happening in the energy markets right now, the crash in the price of oil has put Russia in a very difficult position domestically as far as its economic stewardship going forward and the crisis it's facing, funding its own budget. And then the rivalry with Saudi Arabia on oil pricing really did not play to Russia's hands. And so Russia cannot play the energy superpower card right now very much. Russia remains, however, a potent disruptive force in international politics, and that includes with the United States, that includes with Europe, and the sort of the ace in the hole here for Russia really is its power as a global cyber actor.
Oh, interesting. Um, let's talk about this international corporations. In the past, when we were both young, in business, we could always rely on somehow, somewhat an international corporation when things were difficult, and when there were difficult times. We remember the Plaza arrangements in the 80s when the currency imbalances were impacting business around the world. We remember the end of the Soviet Empire and how business was keeping afloat after 9/11, etc., etc. Today, things for me as a layman are not really clear. International cooperation, will it ever come back?
Yeah, that's a pretty good question. So, my most recent memory, because I'm so young, is the financial crisis of 2008.
Mhm.
And that's probably the last example that we've had of the world coming together to solve a global problem. And so you had governments and regulators and the Federal Reserve, the Bank of Japan, the
Yep.
European Central Bank, the Bank of England, all of these international organizations coming together to work on a common problem. And that was it. 2008 was the high point and the final point in global cooperation. We haven't seen it on climate change. We haven't seen it on regional conflict. We haven't seen it on migration and refugees. You don't see cooperation on income inequality and poverty. And now we have the pandemic. And not only did you not see international cooperation, you saw international competition. You saw the United States trying to buy a German vaccine manufacturer.
Yeah.
You saw countries sort of pretending to ship medical equipment to each other, and some of it worked and some of it didn't, and some of it got there and some of it was blocked. And we're wondering if there's ever a moment again where leadership will stop being tactical, will stop being introspective, and will once again think strategically and globally. And right now, the stars are not lining up in direction. Our view is that most leaders, the G7, the G20 type leaders, are in their own patches, working on their own problems, and forget about everybody else.
Yeah. On the other hand, what we have seen now, at least in Germany, and maybe you disagree, that at least on a European level, cooperation and, let's say, financial rescue of those countries most impacted, like Spain and Italy, is suddenly an option. Something that wasn't at all an option in 2010.
Oliver, I've learned over experiencing that disagreeing with you is a losing game. But I will say this. One of the number one questions we get from our clients is about the long-term durability of the European Union.
Uh-huh.
And so whether that's the right question or the wrong question, it's an important question, and lots of clients are asking it. And our view on Europe is that there is no existential or mortal threat to the European Union, and that, yes, there are disagreements now, as there have been about critical issues facing the European Union over the past 10 years. The quick answer is to say that the European Union will muddle through this as it muddles through all of its major crises. But on a slightly more serious level, most of the primary drivers of stability in the European Union are still there. And that is that the Franco-German relationship is okay. It might even be better than it has been in the past. And if you go to public opinion polls from country to country, even in places like Poland or even in places like Italy or Hungary, public opinion is rock solid behind the European Union.
Wow. Well, that's a bit of good news for me. I'm a devoted European. Um, Now, Corona everywhere. Chuck, this can't be everything, right? What happened to all the good old political risk of last year? They have come out of fashion. I mean, Corona as an acute issue, and as you started out saying, it is somehow accelerating or boosting or partly veiling the existing problems. What are the long-term risks that European companies, that European players need to look out for in the next couple of years, even with Corona still going strong, or even if a vaccine is found and applied? So, what else is there?
Yeah, so we look forward to the day when the coronavirus and the pandemic is not the number one driver of risk. And so as we exit the acute phase of the pandemic, companies, European companies, global companies, have to do two things. I think you keep one eye on the pandemic because exiting the acute phase of the pandemic is incredibly complicated, actually. There's no such thing as just sort of saying, oh, phew, it's over. Let's get back to business as usual. The exit from the pandemic is incredibly fragmented and is keeping companies quite busy. So you keep
Okay.
one eye on that. But
Okay,
then
but
you,
don't you? I mean, I remember that you issued a couple of like, what are your top five favorite risks to look out for? Don't you have something like this? I mean, you
that's
should
right. So
stay.
we had a top five at the beginning of 2020.
Oh,
We
tell us before Corona that was.
we had a top five list of global risks for 2020 in January.
Okay.
And then we redid the list for COVID-19 just at the end of June. And to be honest with you, the list of risks stayed exactly the same. We just reorganized them a little bit. We changed the order a bit.
Okay. Ah, there they are. Can tell
Right.
us a
And
bit about them, please. That's
so, the number one risk is this notion of the lack of global strategic leadership. And so that is still there. The other thing for European companies and for companies with a global footprint is we're a little bit concerned about this complicated cocktail of economics and politics and countries that have unstable political fundamentals and very, very difficult economic foundations. Those countries are going to really come under enormous pressure for the rest of 2020. We thought that was the case in January. We think this is even more the case now. One of the things that we haven't talked about that's interesting is activism.
okay. You mean
Companies are facing.
civil society activism or activism by the state, or what kind of activism we're talking?
So this is think back to 2019. This is what was happening in Santiago, Chile. This is what was happening with the Gilets jaunes. This is what was happening with Extinction Rebellion. This is what was happening with the proposed tax on WhatsApp calls in Lebanon, and you had these protests in Beirut. So civil society, social activism aimed at governments that will now, going forward, be aimed at companies and will also include a pandemic element. So civil society is now going to think, what did your company do during the pandemic? How good was your health insurance? How many people did you lay off? What did you do for your community? What did you do with your suppliers? What did you do with your customers? How did you behave as an organization under the pandemic conditions? And activists will be putting an X-ray, a laser on companies and holding them accountable.
True, and I mean, you could see already the movements in the U.S. that suddenly made a couple of companies stopping placing ads with Facebook and Twitter, right?
That's
Because
right.
of
And the pressure on companies is going to increase because governments are not stepping up. Governments are not legislating. Governments are not taking the difficult decisions about the social agenda, whether it's anything from gun control or gender equality or helping address the difference between what does your CEO make and what does the receptionist make,
Mhm.
these drivers of income inequality. So companies are going to be asked to solve all the problems that government won't.
Okay. Two more risks, I think, missing on your list.
Yeah. So
You
we
are, yeah, oh God,
There we are. So
COVID-19.
we
Yeah,
talked about the campaign trail
yeah.
and the role that the U.S.-China relationship is going to play during the election. It was our feeling in January that while the U.S. was busy campaigning, countries like Iran, China, North Korea, Russia would push really hard on their global agendas and move things forward for themselves while the US was distracted and busy with the election. That exactly remains the case. But now we drop that whole situation into the global pandemic and the heightened global tensions. And we focus on US China because we really do believe that that relationship is going to be probably one of the number one drivers of risk for every company and for every country around the world this year.
Okay, thank you. Understood. Chuck, the world is a grim place even without Corona.
Well, Oliver, so
I
here's what you
learned
need to
this
think.
from you now.
Now, I don't know if this is a chill out session, and I don't know if you encourage your audience to have cocktails or,
I prepared a little glass of Fever Tree already.
that it usually helps maybe after a talk like this to have a very strong drink. But so, Oliver, you know that one of the reasons that we talk about risk is that companies that can identify these risks, companies that can mitigate these risks, these are the companies that both tactically and strategically, these are the companies that will then have the time and the headspace to look for opportunity. And,
Okay,
and,
let's
and
talk about that.
yeah, so yeah, what does this mean for European companies? What does this mean for companies doing business all around the world, but maybe they have a headquarter in Frankfurt or in Munich or in Stuttgart or London or Paris or Milan? Uh, Look, the world still presents us with enormous economic potential. There will be an economic recovery. And Oliver, we have this partnership with a macroeconomic forecasting agency called Oxford Economics. And Oxford Economics is predicting a significant rebound in economic growth that's going to start in Q3 of the current year. It will accelerate in Q4 and accelerate in Q1 of 2021. Oxford Economics then predicts that the acceleration will taper and that we will have manageable growth for 2021. There are a lot of very important assumptions underlying those forecasts. Some of those assumptions may or may not materialize, but there's no question that there will be a rebound. Companies that exit this crisis carefully and that exit this crisis in a state of preparation for growth will see opportunity. They'll see opportunity in familiar markets. They will see opportunity in new markets, and they will see the chance to reestablish their presence globally, to reestablish and to firm up their supply chains, to build additional resilience into the way they do business going forward. And so companies that, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And so companies that come out of this crisis feeling that they know what to do now, that they've grown and they've learned from this experience, those are the companies that will be in a sort of forward-looking posture rather than a defensive posture, and they will be able to capture this growth.
Okay, I mean the risk and the opportunities are obviously not evenly distributed around the globe. What's this map you've been displaying in the background all the time? Can you talk a bit about this map?
So this is Risk Map. This is our flagship annual forecast of political and security risk for the year. We normally do this at the end of December, beginning of January. This is a special edition that is pandemic proof. This is a map designed to survive COVID-19. And this is our forecast for the rest of the year. And you'll see the colors on the map is our forecast for security risk. And that goes from a very low comfortable, soothing, dark green to
In
an
Greenland.
that's right, Greenland. We should all be investing in Greenland. And then it goes to a very uncomfortable and very hot, dark crimson for extreme security risk. And then if you go to our website and you look at this very closely, you'll be able to see some letters on the map that also go from very low to extreme. And that is our forecast for political risk for
Right.
the coming year.
Okay, so guys, if you are going abroad and you are about to uh, invest in places that are not in your not your home turf, go and check out Chuck's company's website. Go for global risk map and control risk. That's really helpful and it's interesting, especially if you look into Africa. We haven't covered Africa in this discussion. I do a lot of work recently in Ethiopia, and this is a fast growing amazing country now, of course, extremely hit by both COVID-19 and a locust plague. Things that were probably difficult to predict, but still, it's a place where you can do business, although probably many European companies would shy away. But with your help, they could probably go into countries like this easily.
Oliver, for a while, we were very, very bullish on Ethiopia, and this is a country that had a strategic vision. This is a country that was looking at how to position itself as a hub for East Africa. This was a country that was working on its infrastructure, on technology. It had a reasonably forward-looking government. It had a strategy, a national strategy, and I know that in previous risk maps, we spent quite a lot of time actually talking about Ethiopia. Africa is having a difficult pandemic. There are a lot of countries in Africa that have yet to hit the peak of infections and mortality. And we're looking very carefully at issues of political stability and social cohesion in Africa going forward. But again, one of these days, our reasonably positive, our bullish narrative on Africa as one of the youngest continents in the world, as one of the most rapidly growing continents in the world, I think that positive narrative will return. We've seen in the past year or so some very smooth political transitions in countries in Africa. And so there is room to come back to those countries and to that continent and look very carefully on a case-by-case basis about where opportunity is.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, this was around the globe in 25 minutes with Chuck Hecker.
Yeah.
Uh, Mind blowing. Okay, we haven't covered the Americas to a large extent, but we do this next time. But we had Africa, we had Asia, we had China, we had Russia, Europe, and the US. Fantastic. Now, of course, what we do with every um, uh, with every guest of ours is we give you now 60 seconds where you can share all your inside wishes. You can do extreme marketing. You can sell like crazy, whatever. You have 60 seconds. Floor's all yours. You have the final comment here. Please, Chuck, fire away.
That is extremely generous of you. And so I'll use the first few seconds just to remind everybody that there's only coffee in this cup, number one. Number two, wear a mask. Number three, think about time. We don't often talk about this in the pandemic, but the coronavirus pandemic has done something very interesting to our sense of time. For some people, it's gone very, very fast. For some people, it's gone very, very slow. And for everyone, I think it's taken the concept of risk and it stood it up on its head. In typical scenario forecasting, the future holds the most risk for us. It's far away. Things are hiding behind corners. There are things that we can't see. There are lots of unknowns and all of these different colored swans that may be out there. What coronavirus and the pandemic has taught us is that risk actually lives most vividly in the near term. You don't know if you can go on holiday next month. You don't know if your country is going to allow you to have a birthday party next week. You don't know what the next 6 months are going to look like. But when we think about the next 6 years, people think about something called the new normal. And this is meant to sound familiar, and it's meant to sound to seem like part of a routine that we know from past experience. And so, companies need to think about time in the same way that sometimes they think about money. What is the future value of money? What is the present value of money? Think about the relationship between risk and time, and make sure that from the board and the C-suite and your in-country reps and throughout your entire organization, that you place yourself somewhere on a time spectrum, and you understand your appetite for risk and the challenges it presents to your companies going forward.
Wow, thank you. The net present value of risk. We should write a paper on that, Chuck. I mean, this is really.
You make it
I
sound
need
very
to.
fancy.
I
That's good.
need,
I love it.
yeah, I need to think about that. That's really great. Okay, Chuck, this was fantastic. This was awesome. This was more than I had ever expected. Around the world. Excellent. Thank you so much. To the audience, thank you so much for listening and for watching us. If you have any comments, please reach out to us. Either use our website, use the chat functionality, or you can contact, of course, Chuck Hacker whenever you want via email or LinkedIn. This was really great. Thank you. Have a wonderful weekend, everybody. Thanks to Chiara for making everything possible here on the production side of things. And see you soon, guys. Bye bye.
Thank you, Oliver. Thank you very, very much.